Thank you all for coming to our webinar where we are kind of launching our new online invasive plant database. As an introduction, I'm Priscilla Crawford. I work here at the Oklahoma Biological Survey as a conservation specialist, and I will be demonstrating at the end of our webinar how to use the database online, although relatively simple. But Amy, our botanist at the Biological Survey and a current president of the Invasive Plant Council, will be starting out with our introduction to how we generated this watch list and the methodology, and talk about the information that's available within the database.
Thank you, Priscilla, and thanks to everyone who's listening today. As Priscilla said, I'm Amy Buthod. I'm a botanical specialist at the University of Oklahoma's Biological Survey. I conduct floristic inventories throughout the state. I'm the collections manager of OU's Robert Berberian, and I'm also the heritage botanist for Oklahoma. I am also currently the president of the Oklahoma Invasive Plant Council. The title of my talk today is the official Oklahoma Invasive Plant Council watch list, an introduction. I'm going to briefly discuss what the watch list is, how we put it together, some of the information it includes, and finally, I'll introduce you to a few of the species on the new list. So, the mission of the Invasive Plant Council is facilitating education and the management of invasive species for the protection of our economic and natural resources. One of the ways we do this is by developing and maintaining lists of problematic invasive species for Oklahoma. Ooh, there we go. The OKIPC currently maintains two lists of invasive species. We have the Dirty Dozen list, which includes the worst of the worst invasive species in the state. These are species that most likely will never be eradicated from established populations. Everyone is probably familiar with the Dirty Dozen list at this point. We've promoted it in a variety of ways, including a poster, a coloring book, and a species guide. The Dirty Dozen list includes 13 species or species groups. 12 of these are exotic or non-native to the state, while the 13th, eastern red cedar, is a native species that has increased in abundance over the years due to the suppression of natural fire regimes. Again, these species are the worst of the worst in our state. They cause harm both ecologically and economically. This slide shows some of the things. Most everyone is probably familiar with these. We've got Japanese honeysuckle, musk thistle, sericea, salt cedar, Johnson grass, Chinese privet, and of course the eastern red cedar I just mentioned. Our second list of invasive species is known as the watch list. The watch list includes species that we are watching out for. These plants have invasive qualities and are present in the state or they're in neighboring states. This includes species that aren't yet abundant in the state, but still they should be monitored, reported, and controlled before they become a bigger problem. This is our original watch list. It was adopted in 2014, and it includes 28 species. The species for this list, as well as for the Dirty Dozen, were selected based on several criteria, including personal knowledge and expertise, and examining presence, absence, and abundance data from Oklahoma and our neighboring states. The original watch list was a little limited in terms of the information it provided, just scientific name, common name of the relevant species, and some geographic information. The regions of the state the species already occurred in and or the regions in which the species could be potentially problematic. And in this original list, the Oklahoma Department of Recreation and Tourism regions or countries were used. This slide shows some of the species on that original watch list. From the upper left, moving clockwise, we have a myrrh honeysuckle, beefsteak plant, purple loosestrife, giant reed, Chinaberry, sulfur cinquefoil, and paper mulberry. Most of you have probably seen these things, even if you don't know them by name. Here are some less common species from that original list. Here we have garlic mustard, common teasel, princess tree, climbing fern, alligator weed, and Nepalese brown top. Some of these species, like the garlic mustard and the Nepalese brown top, have actually become much more abundant since the publication of the original watch list. Plants move around all the time, and their distributions and abundances do change. Therefore, lists like the watch list cannot be static. They need to be updated over time, and that's what we decided to do back in late 2019. So how do we go about updating the watch list? First of all, I was tasked with compiling a list of potential candidate species. I searched for the equivalents of our watch list from the states that border Oklahoma: Texas, Arkansas, Kansas, Missouri, Colorado, and New Mexico. I also included Louisiana because it's pretty close geographically. I automatically added all the species on all these lists as candidates for our new watch list. In addition to the various states list, I also consulted papers by professional botanists. I searched national databases of current species distributions, including USDA plants, EdMaps, which is a mapping system for documenting invasive species from the University of Georgia, and BONAP, or the Biota of North America portal, which is an attempt to provide state and county level distribution maps of all plant taxa within North America. I also searched records from herbaria, including around the world, utilizing the Texas-Oklahoma Regional Consortium of Herbaria data portal, that's a mouthful. And I also consulted lists from the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food and Forestry, an older list of potentially problematic species compiled by the Nature Conservancy and the Native Plant Society. Here's the complete list of sources that I used to compile the draft list. A lot of text crammed on a slide, but this source list will be available on our website, which you will hear about very shortly. Okay, so following my initial research, we came up with a draft candidate list of approximately 300 species. I included some very basic information in this draft: scientific name, common name, the locations where the species are currently problematic. I also included the source of the name and whether or not the species had already been reported in Oklahoma. 112 of the species on our candidate list have already been reported in Oklahoma. This initial list was then sent out to the board for review and comments. As the board discussed the new list, we talked about what exactly we wanted the new list to be and to do. We determined that we wanted the new watch list to be as useful as possible to as many different stakeholders as possible. And to move forward, we would need to acquire a lot of additional information and data. First of all, we knew we needed more detailed information on where the species is a problem. We needed to closely examine the current range maps of the species to determine if they are a threat to invading Oklahoma, or if they already are in Oklahoma, what the extent of the problem actually is. We also needed to know who or what habitat is affected by the invasive species. What groups of people are most likely to encounter it, and where will they encounter it? Does the species invade rangelands? Is it problematic in urban areas? Are we talking to suburban homeowners, or to ranchers, or to farmers, or to natural area managers? Including this information on the new watch list will allow us to get the appropriate information to the people who need it the most. Also, we wanted to know the impacts of the species in question, or how it affects the stakeholder. Does it crowd out native species? Is it toxic to livestock? Does it hybridize with native species or crop species? Does it have the potential to invade natural areas? Again, including information such as this will allow us to target specific stakeholder groups with the information that is pertinent to them and their concerns.
Hey, Amy.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. We just couldn't see the slide there for a second, but we can see it now.
Gotcha.
Okay,
All right.
thank you. Sorry.
No problem. No problem. Basically, we wanted our new watch list to be able to tell us where the species is a problem, who it affects, and how it affects them. With 300 species to consider, we realized that gathering this data would take a long time and that the board could not do it alone. Fortunately for us, we were able to hire a former OSU student, JD McCoy, to compile all this data, including an extensive document with range maps and a resource document with all of the references. She did a fantastic job of pulling all this together. So this very busy slide shows a portion of the giant spreadsheet JD compiled. Note the additional information she added, including information on habitats affected, the invasive species impacts, and their sources and their likelihood of introduction into the state. This slide also shows her sources, which again will be available on our website. And in the lower left, it shows the incredibly helpful range document, which was key to whittling down the list to a manageable size. Using the range map document, we were able to eliminate a lot of species. If you recall, the original draft list included all species from watch list equivalents from our bordering states plus Louisiana. Some of these species, however, are actually found far away from the Oklahoma borders and probably not a threat at a current time. Here's an example of what I mean by that. On the left, you see a distribution map for something called torpedo grass. Torpedo grass appeared in both Texas and Louisiana lists of problematic species. But when you examine the actual range map, the occurrences are far, far away from Oklahoma. Based on this distribution, we felt it wasn't an issue for our state at the time, so we eliminated torpedo grass from our list. On the right, however, you can see that morning bride is found in north central Texas, right up against the border. We kept this species in the list. Primarily using these range maps, we were able to cut down the draft list to 93 species. So our list was set. Our next task was to figure out how to present all of the information in a coherent and useful way. First of all, we decided to change how we divided the state into regions. I mentioned the old watch list used the Department of Recreation and Tourism countries, which you see on the left. We weren't sure how meaningful those divisions were botanically, so instead we divided the state into regions you see on the right. The Northeast and Southeast regions correspond to the divisions utilized by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service, but we opted to divide Western Oklahoma into Southwest, Northwest, and Panhandle regions, whereas they consider those regions to be one. We also decided to standardize the language used to describe the systems and habitats affected by the invasive species. We divided those into the 5 categories you see here. Cropland areas include areas used for the production of crops for harvest, including row crops and permanently hayed fields, while pasture lands consist of introduced or enhanced native forage species used for grazing. Rangeland areas include areas managed by ecological processes such as grazing, fire, and weather events. These are areas where the grasses is the vegetation is primarily native, predominantly grasses and forbs interspersed with shrubs and trees. Disturbed and waste areas include roadsides, abandoned lands, power cuts, and pipeline right-of-ways. Urban and garden areas include lawns, flower beds, and gardens found around homes and businesses in developed areas. And finally, riparian and aquatic areas include areas in and around seeps, wetlands, streams, rivers, ponds, and lakes. Adding these standardized habitat designations allowed us to do something really cool with the list. We now have the ability to create customized lists based on the habitat and region affected. For instance, if you were only interested in species that affected urban or garden areas in Southeast Oklahoma, we could create a list showing just that. That's what this rather boring slide shows. The ability to do this is super cool, but we still had to figure out how to present the data in a way that wasn't completely overwhelming. After all, this one new watch list could be divided into 25 separate lists, 5 habitats, 5 regions, 25 separate lists. So some members of the board, led by our next speaker, Priscilla Crawford, came up with the idea to create a searchable database, which you will hear about in her talk. Finally, we also decided that the new watch list needed an official statement of purpose, which is as follows. In addition to the Dirty Dozen list of unwanted invasive plant species, the OKIPC has created a watch list of invasive plant species known to be one or more of the following: present in Oklahoma and or a bordering state, negatively affecting the economy, environment, or human health in Oklahoma and or a bordering state, listed as a noxious weed or an aquatic nuisance plant species in Oklahoma or a bordering state. The list is to be used to facilitate education and management of invasive plant species in Oklahoma. It's not a static document and is subject to change as new data become available. So that's how we came up with the watch list. I'm going to use the next few minutes to show some of the species on the new list, just briefly, just a few of them. So most of you are probably familiar with multiflora rose, and this is one that I was surprised wasn't on the original watch list. Multiflora rose is a climbing, rambling perennial shrub with clusters of white flowers. It originated in China, Japan, and Korea, and it came here via the horticultural trade, where it was introduced as an ornamental and as a rootstock for developing other roses. Planting was also encouraged by the USDA for a while for erosion control and wildlife management. Multiflora rose produces a huge quantity of highly viable seeds. Its fruits are eaten by birds, so it's capable of being dispersed over long distances, and it can also produce vegetatively, and it has no native predators. It forms impenetrable thickets and displaces native species. Multiflora rose impacts disturbed and waste areas, rangelands, forest and woodlands, and cropland and pasture land. The regions in Oklahoma likely to be impacted by multiflora rose include the Northeast, the Northwest, the Southeast, and the Southwest. So sweet autumn clematis is a climbing semi-evergreen ornamental vine with white fragrant four-petaled flowers that appear in the late summer through the fall. It's native to Japan and China, and it was introduced into the US as an ornamental. It's still widely available as an ornamental. You probably see this one pretty often in town. Sweet autumn clematis prefers sun to partial shade, and it invades forest edges, right-of-ways, and urban green spaces, especially near creeks, where it can shade out, smother, or strangle native vegetation. Sweet autumn clematis is likely to impact disturbed or waste areas, urban or garden areas, riparian and aquatic areas, and forest and woodland areas. The regions most likely to be impacted in Oklahoma are the Northeast and the Southeast. The distribution of the species is probably much more extensive than the map shows. This is one that does not have a lot of herbarium records for some reason. If you've been to other webinars that we've put on, you're probably familiar with this guy. This is the tallow tree. It's a small to medium-sized tree native to southern China, Taiwan, and Vietnam. It was introduced for ornamental qualities, but it was also promoted by the USDA as an oil crop. Tallow tree is a bad one. It's really tolerant of wide-ranging environmental conditions. It grows fast. It's resistant to pests. And it can invade shaded areas and undisturbed areas where it can replace entire stands of trees. It can also alter the soil chemistry. Habitats affected by tallow tree include rangelands, forest and woodlands, urban and garden areas, and riparian and aquatic areas. The regions most likely to be impacted, or rather region I should say, is the Southeast, where it should be of particular concern to those folks who manage natural areas. This guy is bad, and we know of a significant population down at the Red Slough WMA, and I expect it to become much more common in the next few years. It's a scary one. So this next potentially problematic plant is Scabiosa atropurpurea, or morning bride. It's in the teasel family, which is the same family as the common teasel, which was on our original watch list. It's already known to be naturalized in our surrounding states of Arkansas, Kansas, and Missouri, and Texas. There are Oklahoma reports just from this year. That's not why it's showing up on this map, but the species has been found in Murray, Marshall, and Bryan counties. Morning bride is an ornamental commonly sold in gardening centers where it's promoted as a butterfly garden plant. It can spread very, very quickly and can form monocultures. In Texas, it's recognized as a huge threat to the few remaining and globally rare blackland prairie sites. It's a native to the Mediterranean area. Areas impacted by morning bride include disturbed and waste areas and cropland and pasture areas. It's most likely to be problematic in the Southeast. Chinese pistache may not be on your radar as a potentially invasive species, but it has been noted as invading natural areas in central Texas. And I have definitely seen it naturalizing in the Norman area. I think if we did a targeted search in urban areas, we would find a lot of it. Chinese pistache is a small tree, same family as poison ivy or sumac, compound leaves that superficially resemble those of our native soapberry. It produces clusters of tiny red fruits, which the birds like and move all over the place. Chinese pistache is native to East Asia and China and was brought to the US as ornamental. It does well as a street tree in urban areas, and it's got beautiful fall color. It's probably very noticeable right now if you live in an urban area. Habitats impacted by Chinese pistache could be urban and garden areas, riparian aquatic areas, cropland and pasture areas, and the region most likely to be impacted by this species is the Southeast. And finally, this is the last one I'm going to show you. This is marsh dayflower. In Oklahoma, the species was first discovered in McCurtain County, and it's now known from Push County as well. It's in the dayflower family, related to the blue weedy dayflowers and also the spiderworts. It's an aquatic herb with very brittle stems, and each little piece that can break off can float away and form a whole new plant. This one is especially troubling to me because of its encroachment on the habitat of Oklahoma's only federally endangered plant species, Harparella nodosa. Marsh dayflower is native to temperate and tropical Asia and was spread around as a contaminant of rice. Habitats impacted by the species include riparian aquatic areas, and the regions in Oklahoma most likely to be impacted by it are the Southeast and the Northeast. These are just some examples of the species you'll find on our new watch list. Priscilla is now going to show you how to access the entire list and its associated data, introducing our new searchable database. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. It looks like we have one question in the chat. Will the database listings for each include the invasiveness classification? For example, did we rank them somehow in invasibility or how invasive they are? And no, we did not do that. And then we have another question. What are fire regimes? Do you want to address that?
I guess we both can address that. What I mean by that are natural fire processes and frequencies. We have suppressed natural fire for a long time now. So I guess that's what I mean. Normally there would be wildflowers from lightning strikes, but we don't allow that to happen. We don't allow those to burn as we used to.
So here we are. This is our the front page of our website, which is okinvasives.org. So you can reach the database right directly from the front page. We have a highlight here, of course, because it's brand new. So we want to highlight it, but it will always have a place up here in our menus as the database tab. So we'll just click on that. And when you click on the database tab, it brings up our first search page. And there's some things about this page that I want to talk about before we go into the search function. But we have a page about the information that Amy just went over about the database. So if you forgot or you want to look something up, we have about the invasive plant database, what it contains. It not only contains the watch list that Amy has been talking about, but also contains the Dirty Dozen or our Baker's Dirty Dozen. So the 13 plants that were on our original Dirty Dozen list. And those are noted when you find them within the database. So we have that description about what this database is, the habitat definitions that Amy went through, a bigger map focusing on how we divided up the state into regions, and then the sources. So Amy skimmed past that because nobody wants to see try to read those, but you can find all of the sources on our website. So that's the information page about the database. Also, this is a new feature for our website, and this is a new database that we are serving up to people. And this is the first time that I have been responsible for a project like this. So there are going to be some bugs. And so we have highlighted down here, if you've come across a bug or if you come across a problem within the database, please let us know. We kind of crowdsourcing some of the information here amongst all of you and the participants that use it. So when you click this button, it will pull up an empty email that will come directly to me. So you just type in what your problem is, and then the email will be sent to me, and hopefully I'll be able to address it in a timely fashion. So please report any problems that you come across. So we have different ways that you can pull up the information. So if you're interested in an invasive species that you already know the name of and you just want a little bit more information, you can either look at it through the scientific name or the common name, and we'll try one to begin with. So scientific names, one of the ones that a lot of people know because scientific and the common name are the same, is hydrilla. So I'm going to click on hydrilla. And this will pull up the species page. So it will list the name, common name, the habitats that are impacted, the regions that are likely to be impacted, what neighboring states this plant has already been found in, if it's already been found in Oklahoma, and then a little tidbit that Amy wrote, kind of what we referred to as our little info blurb, the things you should know about this species. Again, it's one of the dirty dozen species, so we've listed that, and just some important tidbits in our database. We didn't want to duplicate all of the other invasive plant databases out there, so we just put something that we thought was relevant specifically to people in Oklahoma. We also have put links to lots of other information. So where appropriate or where there is good information, we have put a link to management information. Here we have a link to OSU extension fact sheet about controlling aquatic weeds. And then we also have additional online resources. So we have the species overview from invasives.org, and I will click on a few of these. And this will take you to a description of the plant. So how big are the leaves? How many are they? Does it flower? Is it mostly vegetation that it produces? Is it fruit that it produces? And then some of the ecological threats. And then of course, there are even more links on this page. Also, Amy was showing you the distribution maps. This will also take you to the distribution map, the second link, that is on the early detection and distribution mapping system. So you can see where it's distributed throughout the United States. Another link, Amy showed some of the distribution maps and said, well, actually, it's been found recently in Oklahoma. And sometimes we find those really recent observations in the iNaturalist records. And if you've been following our seminar series, you know that we've been promoting people to report invasive species using iNaturalist. So we have iNaturalist records for Oklahoma. Oh, and my face pops up all over because I was doing the hydrilla surveys. So you can see here, these small dots indicate the places that I found hydrilla in the last few years. And then you can do the same thing for all of North America. And then we also have a link to herbarium records. Right now, this link goes to all the herbarium records that have ever been made of hydrilla within North America. We're debating on if that should be only Oklahoma herbarium records or if all of North America is useful. If you have any comments, please let us know. And then of course we have one image of the plant, but then the invasive.org website has a whole gallery of invasive species. So this will provide lots of photos of some invasive species, but you also find that there are some invasive species that don't have a lot of images associated with them online. So there will be some blank ones. And if you find those, let us know, and we will work on providing visual information for those species. So that is hydrilla. And we use this little back button to go back. And like I said, you can also look for common name. And the example I was going to show was Chinese tallow, but Amy went through Chinese tallow quite a bit. So let's see. Let's try something that's not another aquatic, maybe not Chinese tallow. Oh, here, how about calorie pair? We talk about calorie pair all the time. Too. So calorie pair, here's another example. The same information, again, we have another extension sheet that it goes to about the invasive calorie pair and how to manage for that. We also have a webinar where we addressed calorie pair too. So we should probably put that link there as well. But just another example of how you can look up individual species. Hitting the back button. Now, Amy talked about how we wanted to, we didn't want to give a giant table of all of these species to everybody. So we wanted people to be able to target what they were most interested in, based on where they live and the habitat, rather than giving them, you know, the 100+ species that we have on the list, which might be overwhelming for a user or a stakeholder that doesn't want to know about everything. We came up with this searchable database. I'm going to preface this at the beginning that there is a bug I already know about. This feature that says any, don't use that feature. Don't click any, because it will not pull up the correct information. I tried to delete this option earlier today, and then everything broke. So we're working on that right now. But until then, you can look up any habitat. So say you are a rancher and you're interested in rangeland. So you can click on the rangeland, and below it generates a list of all the invasive species that are potentially impact rangeland. So, and it's a pretty long list, as you might guess. Oh, there's one that doesn't have a good image. So it's a pretty long list. But say you're a rancher who lives in Weatherford. So you're like, I don't care what the problems are in southeastern Oklahoma. I need to know what is in Weatherford, northwestern Oklahoma. So then you also choose northwestern Oklahoma, and it pulls up a much shorter list, or at least a shorter list, that is specific to your region. And you can see here within the regions which region each species impacts. So you can narrow it down. Now, if you want to make a new list, you should hit reset. Now, say you are in the southeastern part of the state. You are an extension agent in Pushmataha County, and you want to know all the species that could potentially be a problem within your region. So you choose southeastern Oklahoma, and it generates this list. So now you have a list of all the southeastern species that could be a problem. And again, you can narrow it down to, like, I'm interested in looking at the forest habitats within southeastern Oklahoma. So then you choose the forest habitat, and it will narrow it down farther. So this is a way to generate these lists, narrow down specifically what you're looking for. And you can do any, like Amy said, any combination up to like the 25 combinations of regions versus habitats. We are considering making downloadable PDFs. That might take some time, and they won't be updated as often. This is a database that will be updated continuously. The watch list and this database is not a static document. That's one reason why we kind of built an online database, is so that we can continue to add information, adjust information, add new species, edit species. Hopefully we won't have to edit too many to say that, yes, they are now in Oklahoma versus having not been in Oklahoma. But those are the features of the website. And we have already updated, even though we haven't officially launched it until today, we've already updated the website a couple times. So just again, don't use the any, because that won't work properly. When you want to generate a new list, you hit reset, and it'll kind of clear everything out and generate a new list. So that's the end of my part. I see that we have some questions. Let's see. I saw a can of worms go by. I'm not sure. Maybe we don't want to deal with that. Okay, so I guess we'll start dealing with the questions. Does that sound good, Amy?
Sure, sure.
Okay. What do the slides show different for the Dirty Dozen list causing harm? That's a question for Amy. What do the slides show different for the Dirty Dozen causing harm?
Could the person asking that question clarify a bit? I'm a little confused about what they are asking. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so down in the chat, clarify that question and we'll come back to it. Let's see, Dennis asks, there's often a great controversy labeling Eastern red cedar as being invasive because it's native, but out of control. Can Priscilla comment on the term, using the term invasive with respect to the Eastern red cedar situation? Yes, so the Invasive Plant Council has decided that we will consider native species to be invasive when they occur in greater abundance than they wouldn't have occurred given the normal disturbance regime like grazing or fire. So the two species that pop out in particular that we have labeled invasive is the Eastern red cedar and mesquite, so honey mesquite. So those two species are officially native to Oklahoma. They have been found in Oklahoma for several hundred years. When the botanists started doing surveys out here, and but they have increased in abundance and have spread within habitats that they hadn't normally occupied, and so that's why we describe those two as invasive species. And there may be additional native species that we might consider in the future when we're adding things to the list. Amy, do you want to add anything about that?
I did add a definition that I found that I like using, and it is in the chat.
Oh, thanks, Amy.
Yeah, a definition of invasive that leaves out nativity altogether and just is a species of plant or animal that outcompetes other species, causing damage to an ecosystem. So no reference to nativity at all. And another group of organisms I can think of that this is sometimes an issue with, maybe not in Oklahoma, but blue-green algae. There are some native blue-green algae that kind of outcompete everybody, as the definition says, and be invasive.
Yeah, if we really want to get into the weeds about this and kind of talk more ecologically and botanically, sometimes people use the term aggressive or shoot, now I've forgotten. But there are other terms that sometimes people use for native plants that are native species that are overabundant usually because of something that people do, like not fire or adding nutrients to a system. And so those, there are some other terms that we could potentially use, but for simplicity, especially with Eastern red cedar and honey mesquite, we do use the term invasive. I guess maybe I should go the other way so I don't, if you answered the question. Okay, so when the species information says currently known from Oklahoma, what does that mean? Do you want to address that, Amy?
Yeah, I could take that one. Currently known from Oklahoma means, to the best of my knowledge, the species has been recorded from the state of Oklahoma. And I determined this looking at a lot of databases and literature, including the USDA Plants Database, EdMaps, which is an invasive species mapping tool, BONAP, which I mentioned, which is another great thing for distribution maps. And I also looked at herbarium records from around the world using that Torch portal that I also mentioned. So I looked in as many places as possible to see if the plant had been found in Oklahoma before. So currently known from Oklahoma means it has been found in Oklahoma at some point.
Good, thank you. The question is, any considerations for making this database available via smartphone app? No, because this website is fully mobile friendly. So hopefully, if you look up okinvasives.org and click on the database, when you pull it up, it should display very clearly as a mobile website. So not all squished and small, but you should be able to pull it up as if you were using an app. So if you have problems with that and it's not working properly, please let us know if it's not displaying and it's still too clunky to use on your phone. So now that we've kind of launched this, we're hoping that lots of people will start using it, and then as more people start using it, we'll find out where all of the problems are. Here's the explanation. So Amy said that when you while the dirty dozen cause harm ecologically and economically, the previous slide showed something contradictory to that. I don't remember what your slide said.
Contradictory to, let me see. So I started off talking about the dirty dozen. So there wasn't really anything before that. I'm sorry, I'm probably being dense, but.
Well, so if we just kind of talk about it, the topic in general, so invasive species are often defined as species that cause ecological and economic harm. And that's for the dirty dozen as well as for the watch list. Maybe those species on the watch list haven't actually caused any harm within Oklahoma yet, but they have within surrounding states or surrounding regions. So that might kind of address that question. So the dirty dozen, maybe this wasn't clear. The dirty dozen were 13 plants that are a terrible problem within the state of Oklahoma. They are already a terrible problem. And we just came up with this list. I mean, there was some science involved, but kind of like the board sat around and were like, what do you think is the worst species within Oklahoma? And we came up with a list, and we kind of narrowed it down to the dozen because that was a kind of a clever number to put on a poster. So these are things that are terrible problems within the state. And there are probably things on the watch list that are equally terrible. But then a majority of things on the watch list are things that could potentially be tackled and dealt with, managed so that they don't become ubiquitous along roadsides or in pasture lands or in street alleys. What do you think that was a good answer, Amy?
I think so. And I do want to point out that the dirty dozen list at this point was done 12 years ago, maybe 2010. Does that sound right? I don't know.
I can't remember what year, but yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah. And I also do want to point out that the new database that Priscilla showed us does include the dirty dozen as well as the species from the old watch list. So it's got everything in there.
Jay asks if we have any suggestions about how to make this online database better known to potential users. I mean, just start telling your colleagues, your coworkers, your friends, people that you work with, people that are any type of stakeholder. Share it on your social media if you use that. Share it by word of mouth if you use that. If you are responsible for a newsletter for a group, like a wildlife group or outdoor recreation group, feel free to send the link and explain this, and we will also send out a link to this webinar so that people can watch it and get a little bit more information about the database. So if everybody can promote it, that would be great, because you guys all represent a lot of different stakeholders that we have in the state who are concerned about invasive species. It would be nice if you clicked on the info page, you could click on the report invasive species button. Oh, that would be very nice. If you could automatically report the invasive species that you were looking on, that would be pretty amazing. And I don't think our current web development is there yet. We are still encouraging people to report it through iNaturalist, and all that is very easy to do. So I highly recommend everybody set up an iNaturalist account and start reporting invasive species that they have in their area. But yeah, that would be some really nice web development. If anybody's a web developer out there and wants to volunteer, hit me up and we can work on it.
So yes, please use iNaturalist. It will be seen by me, most likely. I will see your observation. And if I don't, it will be ingested by an invasive species database. So your data will get used somewhere. Please use iNaturalist.
Yes, and Amy and I look at it regularly to find out information about what people are reporting in the state, rare species as well as invasive species, and then just things we're looking for in particular. Oh, and Karen goes to explain about species that were introduced for specific purposes. Yes, so many of our invasive species were introduced for a good reason. It was beautiful, or it thought to be good forage, or it was good erosion control. So yeah, we promoted eastern red cedar for shelter belts, so that also encouraged a native species to become invasive. So yes, so we have done this to ourselves. We have made the problem invasive species. So I have scrolled down to the bottom of the questions. Thank you, Karen. Karen Hickman, also a long-term board member and former president of the Invasive Plant Council and expert in rangeland invasive species. I don't see any more questions. If anybody has some, type quickly, or I don't know if you could hold your hand up. I'm not sure. I'm not very good at the holding hand up thing in Zoom, but thank you all for attending. We should also mention that all of this data. So Amy spent a lot of time pulling together the watch list table, as well as JD McCoy, the student helper from the Oklahoma State University. But then all of the Invasive Plant Council board members have had hours and hours of input and kind of pouring over this document. So we owe this whole database to a wide variety of people that have served on the Oklahoma Invasive Plant Council board. So thanks to all of those people, and also experts that weren't officially on the board, but we have asked multiple times about their opinions. Do you want to say anything else about that, Amy?
I would like to say that Priscilla single-handedly has done the database work all by herself. And
no, I hired people. People.
You hired people and you facilitated it, and you've done a lot of work to make it look pretty. So there you go.
So all the bugs are my problem. Well, thanks everybody. And it looks like people are just giving us praise, which I really appreciate. But it doesn't look like any more questions have come up. So I guess we will wrap it up. Thanks for joining us. It'll probably take us a few days to get this cleaned up and put on the website. So don't look for it until sometime next week. Thank you all, and enjoy the fall weather, and try not to enjoy the Chinese pistache foliage too much. Although I think I just posted a picture of the beautiful autumnal foliage from it.
Priscilla, really? Oh my gosh. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
It's bad.